The first time my daughter-in-law called me a burden, she said it the way some women comment on the weather, lightly, carelessly, as if it weren't meant to cut. But it cut. At 77, you learn to pretend that words don't pierce as deeply as they do. Yet that morning, the words settled inside me like a cold stone I could not swallow. I was standing at the kitchen counter, folding the dish towel the way I always do, edges aligned, corners sharp, when Kayla walked in with her bright, stretched smile. "Margaret," she said, "you're using the wrong detergent again. It makes our kitchen smell old." She waved her hand in the air, as if shooing away something unpleasant. I swear, keeping track of these things is becoming a burden. A burden. She said it while tapping on her phone, already bored of her own insult. I stood there quietly, looking at the towel in my hands. My hands are still steady, despite her whispers about my declining years. It's strange how people decide you're fading simply because your hair has surrendered to silver. My son, Daniel, didn't hear her. Or maybe he did and pretended he didn't. He'd been doing that more often. Pretending. Pretending not to notice her impatience with me, her small sighs when I walked into the room, the way she took every chance to remind me that I lived here temporarily, even though no one had said those exact words out loud. I moved into the little apartment above their garage last winter after the doctor told me the stairs in my old house were becoming a danger, Daniel insisted. "Mom, it'll be easier for everyone," he said, meaning well. He always means well, but good intentions can still leave bruises. Kayla didn't approve, though she hid it at first. She hugged me stiffly on moving day and said, "We'll make it work." Some people can turn a simple sentence into a warning, and some mothers, like me, hear the warning but choose to look away. I tried to stay out of their way. I cooked small meals for myself, kept the apartment spotless, avoided the main house unless invited. But even then, Kayla found ways to remind me that I was an extra item on her list of responsibilities she never wanted. That morning, after her little comment, I stepped outside to breathe. The winter air stung my cheeks, but at least it was honest. I've always liked truthful things: cold wind, warm bread, the sound of reading aloud. In my years as a librarian, I learned that truth is rarely loud. It's usually quiet, like a page turning. Sitting on the bench beside the garage, I watched their daughter, my granddaughter Lily, skip across the yard with her backpack bouncing behind her. She waved when she saw me, bright and open, like children are before the world teaches them restraint. If there is one person who still sees me as whole, it's her. 12 years old, but with a softness that reminds me of her grandfather. I sometimes whisper to the photograph of my late husband, Arthur, kept on the nightstand. "You'd know what to say," I tell him. He always did. He had a way of placing his hand on top of mine, steady and gentle, like an anchor, reminding me I hadn't drifted anywhere. But he isn't here, and I handle things alone now. When I went back inside for my coat, I overheard Kayla on the phone in the hallway. "I can't keep managing her," she whispered sharply. "She forgets things. She slows everything down. Honestly, she's becoming a burden." The second time she said it, she didn't even soften her voice. I stood very still. Not because her words shocked me, by then I already knew how she saw me, but because of something else. Something unexpected. I felt calm. A strange, quiet calm, the kind you feel right before a storm breaks. But the storm, this time, wasn't going to be aimed at me. I could sense it forming, gathering, waiting. And I knew something that Kayla did not. Nothing in my life had ever been handed to me, but everything in hers had been handed to her. And people like that never imagine the day when the hand that gives finally closes. I folded my coat over my arm and stepped outside again. The bank would be opening soon. And although I didn't yet know what would come of it, I did know one thing with absolute clarity. I was done being a burden. The day after Kayla's little declaration, I woke before dawn, the way women my age often do, not because of insomnia, but because silence feels safer before the world wakes up. The small apartment above the garage was cold, though I'd set the heater higher the night before. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and moved slowly through the kitchenette, touching things that had become my company. The chipped mug Arthur once bought me at a roadside fair, the kettle that wheezed like an old dog, the soft lamp that glowed like a candle. Living alone isn't frightening. Being tolerated is. I boiled water for tea and watched steam rise like a thin veil. Most mornings, I imagined Arthur sitting across from me, tapping his newspaper with the tip of his finger, saying, "You're stronger than you think, Margaret." He said that most often in my 50s, when I worried about aging. I wish he could see me now. Older, yes, but far less afraid. The yard outside was still dark when I stepped onto the small steps leading down to the driveway. Frost glittered on the grass. Daniel's car was gone. He always left early. Kayla, I assumed, was still inside, probably scrolling through her phone, sighing about something trivial. She never sighed about anything meaningful. If sorrow ever visited her, it wasn't the kind that softened a person. I walked toward the mailbox, partly out of habit and partly because movement keeps the joints from stiffening. There was nothing inside but a flyer for a lawn service. I traced the edges of the paper with my thumb, thinking of how many times Daniel had promised to mow the yard for me before I moved here, and how quickly those promises faded once it was no longer my yard. I took a slow lap around the garage, breathing in the cold air. No one disturbed me there. No one would call my name. It is strange how a family can live only a few steps away, yet you feel like a visitor in a boarding house. At 8:30 sharp, I heard the back door slam. Kayla stepped out, heels clicking across the patio as if announcing her displeasure to the world. She spotted me near the garden bed and frowned, as though even my presence on the property rearranged something in her carefully curated life. "Oh, Margaret," she said, pulling her coat tighter, "could you please not leave the porch light on all night? It shines into the kitchen and keeps me up. Honestly, I've mentioned it before. You forget things so easily." I looked at her carefully, not cruelly, just carefully. "I turned it off at 10, I said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard, but only for a moment. "Well, maybe the bulb is faulty. Everything around here is falling apart lately." Her smile was thin and sharp. Then she walked away, sliding into her car without waiting for a reply. It's strange what people choose to see. She looked at me and saw inconvenience, fragility, something to manage. What she never noticed was how carefully I listened to her, how I measured each shift in tone, each complaint disguised as a request. People reveal themselves most clearly when they are unkind. I returned to my apartment and sat by the window. Lily's school bus would arrive soon. I always waited to see her leave, even from a distance. It reminded me that love still existed somewhere in this household. When she finally bounded outside, her backpack swinging, she waved at me with both hands. "Grandma!" Her voice carried across the chilly air. I opened the window a little. "Have a good day, sweetheart." "You too," she called, then turned back to adjust her hat. Kayla hurried her along, barely glancing in my direction, as though acknowledging me would require too much effort. After the bus left, silence returned. Too quickly, too completely. Inside the apartment, I sat at my small table and took out the old leather folder Arthur and I once jokingly called our quiet secrets. It held documents we never needed often: insurance, pension statements, the papers for the trust Arthur set up when Lily was born. He always insisted on protecting the two of us. "Not because I think something will happen," he'd said, "but because I love you too much to leave anything to chance." I traced the embossed edge of the folder. It had been a long time since I'd opened it. But yesterday, when Kayla called me a burden, twice, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not spite, a kind of awakening. A reminder that I hadn't lived 77 years just to fade quietly into someone else's discomfort. When I looked at those papers now, I didn't feel fear or guilt. I felt steadiness. Everything in that folder was in my name alone, not Daniel's. Certainly not Kayla's. I thought of the way Kayla counted everything: her time, her energy, her sacrifices. But she never counted what wasn't hers. She didn't know how. A soft knock startled me. For a moment, I hoped it was Lily. But when I opened the door, it was Daniel. My son looked tired, not from work, but from the quiet strain of living between two women he didn't quite understand. "Mom," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can we talk later? I'm dealing with something at the office. Kayla said you seemed upset yesterday." I smiled gently, letting him look into a calmness I wasn't sure he recognized anymore. "I'm all right, Daniel, truly. You go to work." He sighed with relief, too much relief, and left. When the door closed, I sat back down at the table, opened the folder fully, and laid the papers flat. For the first time in months, the silence around me didn't feel lonely. It felt like possibility. Daniel stopped by again that evening, long after the sun slipped behind the bare trees. I heard his footsteps on the stairs before he knocked. Heavy, tired, hesitant. It's always the hesitancy that tells me more than the words he chooses. "Mom?" he called softly. "Are you still awake?" I opened the door a few inches. "Of course, darling. Come in." He stepped inside, rubbing his hands together from the cold. He looked around the small apartment, the tidy counters, the neatly folded blanket on the sofa, as if checking for signs that something was wrong with me, something Kayla might have mentioned. His eyes lingered on the kettle warming on the stove. "I didn't mean to bother you," he said. "I just wanted to check in. Kayla said you seemed a little distant lately." Distant. That was a new one. For months, I'd been treated more like furniture than family, and now I was the distant one. I motioned for him to sit. "Tea?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. Thanks." As I poured hot water into 2 cups, he watched me as though expecting me to fumble. When I didn't, when my hands moved steadily, gracefully, as they always have, he looked almost relieved, almost ashamed. But shame never stays long with people who avoid looking at uncomfortable truths. He blew on his tea. "Mom, if Kayla said something that upset you, she didn't mean anything by it. She's been really stressed. Work, Lily's school, my hours." I sat across from him, folding my hands gently in my lap. "She called me a burden, Daniel." He froze. His cup hovered halfway to his mouth. "When?" he finally asked, barely above a whisper. "Yesterday morning, and again on the phone later." He set the cup down slowly, carefully, the way a man does when he's trapped between two loyalties and not brave enough to choose one. Mom, she didn't mean it like that. I smiled. A small one. The kind you give to a child who thinks he's hiding behind a curtain when his feet are sticking out. People usually mean things exactly the way they say them. He exhaled, a long, frustrated sigh. She's just overwhelmed. Having you here, it's an adjustment. For whom? I said it softly, without sharpness, but he flinched anyway. He rubbed his forehead. I know it hasn't been easy, but Kayla's trying. She worries a lot about, well, your health, your memory. My memory, I repeated, almost curious. And what exactly have I forgotten? He opened his mouth, but no answer came, because nothing had been forgotten. In the last month alone, I remembered Lily's school dates, the dentist appointment no one wrote on the calendar, the package on their porch before they even noticed it was stolen. If anything, I kept their household running more smoothly than they realized. I leaned back in my chair. Daniel, your wife is uncomfortable with me living here. That's fine. But what she says about me, what she believes about me, doesn't make it true. I know, he said quietly. Then after a pause, I just don't want you to feel unwanted. The word hung in the air. Unwanted. It tasted honest. Feeling unwanted, I said slowly, isn't the worst thing in the world. What hurts is when the people you love pretend not to notice you feeling it. He lowered his gaze to the floor. I'm trying, Mom. I know you are. And he was. Daniel was a good boy once, and parts of that boy still lived inside the tired man sitting before me. But Kayla's influence wrapped around him like ivy. Soft at first, then tightening. He didn't see it. Not the way I did. Men rarely see the threads that women pull around them. He cleared his throat. If you ever need anything, money, help, anything, just say so. We're here for you. The irony floated there between us, unspoken and bitter. I was the one who never asked for anything. They were the ones always needing time, favors, quiet, space, understanding, and in ways Daniel didn't even know, money. I looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes were deeper. The years had softened him, but not with wisdom, with exhaustion. Daniel, I said gently, I need only one thing right now. What's that? To be treated with the dignity I've earned. He lifted his eyes to mine, startled. Not angry, just startled by the firmness in my voice. My voice had always been soft, gentle. But gentleness does not erase strength. It merely hides it until the right moment. He swallowed. I can talk to Kayla. I don't want you to talk to her, I said quietly. Not yet. Then what do you want me to do? I brushed my fingers against the warm porcelain of my teacup. I want you to listen. Just listen. Everything else will make sense soon. He nodded slowly, though he didn't understand. How could he? Nothing had happened yet. He stood to leave, lingering near the door. Mom, you know we love you, right? I smiled again, another small, careful smile. I know you try. After he left, I washed the dishes one by one, savoring the simple rhythm. The apartment grew quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. The next morning began with the sound of Kayla's voice drifting up through the open garage window. Sharp, irritated. She rarely spoke softly, only sweetly, which is different. Sweetness can hide things. Irritation rarely does. I paused halfway through slicing an apple, listening without meaning to. I'm telling you, Daniel, she snapped. Your mother left the porch light on again. She denies it, but I checked at midnight. I can't live like this, constantly fixing her mistakes. Her mistakes. The phrase rolled around the kitchen like a marble searching for a place to settle. I finished cutting the apple into neat slices and arranged them on a plate, though my appetite had already wandered off. Daniel mumbled something in reply, too quiet for me to hear, but Kayla's voice rose, as it often did when she felt unchallenged. And she keeps touching things in the kitchen. That woman rearranged the spice drawer again. I can't even find the turmeric. The turmeric. Of course. A tragedy worthy of opera. I set the plate aside and washed the knife slowly, methodically. Living with unkindness requires rhythm, or it fills the entire room. I've learned to let the water run longer on mornings like these. When I stepped outside, the air was warmer than the day before. The kind of morning that pretends spring is near, even though winter still has its grip. Lily was on the back steps tying her shoelaces. She brightened when she saw me. "Grandma, I drew something for you." She dug into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a sketch of me sitting in my window with a cup of tea. The lines were tender, thoughtful. Children draw what they feel, not what they see. "It's beautiful," I said, tracing the outline of my own face in her pencil strokes. "Thank you, sweetheart." Kayla emerged behind her, adjusting her scarf. She barely glanced at the drawing. "Lily, we're running late. Tell your grandmother goodbye." Lily hugged me tightly, then hurried toward the bus stop. Kayla followed, heels clicking briskly, each sound a reminder of her impatience with everyone who moved slower than she did. I walked back upstairs and thought of Arthur again, not as comfort this time, but as contrast. He used to say, "Kindness is quiet strength." Kayla believed strength was volume. I sat at the table, opened the leather folder, and sifted through the documents again. Trust papers, pension letters, the modest savings account. Everything organized, everything clear. I didn't need to touch these papers. They didn't require anything from me, but something about them grounded me. They reminded me of who I was before someone else decided they could redefine me. At 10, the door to the garage creaked. Someone climbed the steps. I expected Daniel, but it was Kayla. She rarely came up here. Doing so implied effort she didn't like giving. She didn't knock. She stepped inside with the entitlement of someone entering a room she'd purchased. "Margaret," she said, smoothing her coat. "We need to talk." I closed the folder gently. "Yes?" She pulled out her phone. "I've been thinking about your finances. I know you say you manage everything on your own, but I'm concerned. At your age, mistakes happen. And if something were to go wrong with your accounts, the consequences could fall on all of us." There it was. Not worry, interest. "I appreciate the concern," I said softly, "but my accounts are in order." Kayla gave a sympathetic smile, the kind that isn't sympathetic at all. Daniel and I agreed it might be smart if one of us had authorization, just to help, just in case. "In case of what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she tapped her phone. "The bank said we'd need your signature. It's very simple. You'd still have control." Her voice lifted on that word, pretending generosity. "But we would too. Purely for your safety." My safety. The phrase sat between us like a wet cloth. I folded my hands. "Kayla, why do you believe I'm incapable of handling my own affairs?" Her smile strained. "It's not that. It's just, you're older, and older people don't always notice when things slip." "I notice quite a lot," I said quietly. Something flickered in her eyes. Annoyance? Maybe even fear. She wasn't expecting resistance. She expected compliance, the kind she'd grown accustomed to receiving from Daniel. Look, she sighed, softening her tone like a parent coaxing a child. Just come with me to the bank tomorrow. We'll get the paperwork sorted. I rose slowly, not abruptly, but with the steadiness of someone who has not forgotten herself. I won't be adding anyone to my accounts. Kayla blinked. But no. The word was gentle, but it landed heavily. She wasn't used to my refusals. She certainly wasn't used to hearing them twice. Her lips tightened. Margaret, I'm only trying to help. Help? I repeated, letting the word sit for a moment. Is something given, not taken? Her expression cracked then, just slightly. The facade wavered. For a fraction of a second she understood that I saw her clearly. Not the version she performed, but the truth underneath. She stepped back toward the doorway. You're making this difficult. I trust you'll manage, I said. She left without another word. The door clicked shut, sharper than necessary. I returned to the table, laid my hand atop the leather folder, and breathed. Not in fear or uncertainty, but in decision. Because now, the pieces were clear. Kayla wanted access. She wanted oversight. She wanted control. But she would soon learn something she had never bothered to imagine. A woman who has lived 77 years does not crumble when pushed. She becomes immovable. I didn't sleep much that night, though not from worry. Worry feels sharp and restless. This was something steadier, almost deliberate. I lay in bed with the small lamp glowing beside me, the folder of documents placed on the chair as if keeping watch. People think age softens you, but sometimes age clarifies you. It narrows your world to what actually matters. By morning, the frost on the window had melted, leaving streaks like fingerprints. I stood there for a long moment, palms on the sill, watching the backyard stir. Kayla opening the patio door, Daniel loading something into the trunk, Lily running circles around them with her hair unbrushed and wild. The small, ordinary chaos of a family I lived beside, but not within. When they drove off, the silence settled again. I made tea and sat at the table, spreading out the trust documents the way one lays out a map before a journey. I traced Arthur's signature, the strong, looping handwriting I'd memorized over decades. He'd insisted I be the primary trustee, even when I'd argued that Daniel was younger. No, Arthur had said, you're the one who sees clearly, even when others look away. He knew me better than I knew myself. The trust existed for two people only, me and Lily. No one else. Not Daniel, not his wife. No amount of persuasion, flattery, or guilt could change that. I'd protected it for years, almost forgetting why. But now I remembered. Around noon, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Softer this time. It was Lily. She peeked around the door, cheeks flushed from the cold. Grandma? Mom forgot her lunch again. Dad's bringing it later. Can I sit with you a while? Of course she could. I opened the door wider. Come in, sweetheart. She plopped down on the small sofa, kicking her feet gently. Mom said you shouldn't be alone so much. I think she worries. Children don't lie, not by intention. They repeat what they hear. I sat beside her. Do you worry about me? No. She shook her head firmly. You're strong. Dad says so too. I smiled at that. Your dad is right. I get along just fine up here. She nodded, satisfied, then noticed the papers on the table. Are those books? Just grown-up things, I said. Boring things. Oh. She leaned back, unimpressed. Grandma, do people get mean when they get older? Mom says older people get confused and frustrated. The question hit me gently. Not painful, but honest. I considered my answer. People don't get mean because they grow older, I said quietly. They get mean when they lose kindness. Sometimes that happens early, sometimes late, sometimes not at all. She thought about this, then rested her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was smaller. I like your kind. I stroked her hair. I like yours too. She stayed until Daniel came to pick her up. He waved to me from the driveway, grateful but distracted. He always seemed distracted these days, by work, by Kayla's expectations, by the constant effort of keeping peace. After they left, I returned to the documents. I added the updated pension statement, checked the balances, reviewed the clause Arthur had written, insisting that Lily receive her share upon college enrollment. Everything was intact. Everything was mine to safeguard. It was after sunset when the house lights flickered on. I heard Kayla's sharp voice downstairs before I even saw her. She burst through the door without knocking. "Margaret, we need to go over something." I didn't look up immediately. I finished writing a note in the margin, capped my pen, then folded my hands. "Yes, Kayla?" She exhaled dramatically, pacing. "I contacted the bank again today. They said if we bring you in tomorrow, we can get the co-signing sorted quickly. This is important, Margaret. You can't keep delaying." I studied her evenly. "I'm not delaying. I'm declining." Her jaw tightened. "You're being unreasonable. We're trying to protect you." "No," I said softly. "You're trying to protect access." That startled her, just enough for the truth to flash across her face. "You don't understand finances," she said suddenly, shifting tactics. "You've lived simply most of your life. There are things Daniel and I handle that you couldn't possibly keep track of." "Then it's fortunate," I said, "that my accounts have nothing to do with yours." Her lips parted slightly, caught between confusion and irritation. "What does that mean?" I closed the folder gently. "It means exactly what it sounds like." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Margaret, we're a family." The word lingered in the cool air of the room. "Families respect each other," I said. "Families don't take advantage. Families don't speak of one another as burdens." Color rose in her cheeks. Not shame, but anger. She wasn't accustomed to being held accountable by anyone she considered beneath her authority. "You're putting us in a difficult position," she said stiffly. "I'm sure you'll manage," I answered again. She left quickly, without bothering to close the door. I stood and closed it myself, quietly, gently, the way one closes the cover of a book at the end of a chapter. Not the end of the story, just a shift. After she was gone, I sat again and ran my fingertips along the edge of the folder. The night outside deepened, steady and unhurried. And in that quiet darkness, something inside me crystallized fully. Kayla wasn't asking for oversight. She was preparing for control, but she was late, years too late. My life had already been built on foundations she could never reach. Kayla avoided me the next morning, not out of guilt. Guilt softens people. This was something else, a tightening, a recalculation. I've seen that look on women who suddenly realize the ground beneath them isn't as steady as they assumed. I stepped out onto the porch to breathe the cold air, letting it fill my lungs the way dignity fills a person who has been underestimated for too long. Below, Daniel was scraping frost off the windshield, his shoulders hunched. Kayla hovered nearby, arms crossed, speaking in low, fast whispers. They both looked tired, but in different ways. He wore exhaustion. She wore annoyance. When she spotted me, her smile flickered on like a motion-activated light. Bright, immediate, and utterly hollow. "Good morning, Margaret. Sleep well?" "Quite well," I said, though I knew she wished I'd said the opposite. Lily bounded out seconds later, bringing warmth to the cold morning. She waved at me with both hands, then tugged at Daniel's sleeve, asking about show and tell. It was a normal family moment, almost sweet, until Kayla sighed loudly, glancing at me as though my presence created the inconvenience. After they drove off, silence returned to the property. But it wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. I made myself tea, sat at the table, and tried to read, but my mind drifted back to the bank. The conversation Kayla had tried to orchestrate, the access she believed she'd soon have. People often mistake my calmness for surrender. They mistake age for weakness. They mistake quiet for yielding. But quiet is simply where I gather my strength. Around 11, a call came. A number I recognized. The bank's main line. "Mrs. Holloway," the representative said politely, "we received an inquiry this morning regarding shared authorization on your accounts. Before we proceed with anything, we wanted to confirm personally with you." The calm inside me deepened, like a slow tide returning to shore. "What inquiry?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "A request submitted through our online portal, indicating that your son and daughter-in-law should have co-management rights. It requires your approval. Naturally, we will not move forward without speaking directly with you." I closed my eyes briefly, not in distress, but in affirmation. The picture was complete now. Kayla hadn't intended to wait for my signature. She'd hoped to slip something through, bold, arrogant, and entirely predictable. "Please note on my profile," I said, "that no one is to be added to my accounts, ever, and flag any future attempts as unauthorized." "Yes, ma'am. We'll also add a verbal password to your file, if you'd like." "Yes," I said softly. "I would like that very much." When the call ended, I rested my hand on the table, absorbing the stillness of the room. Not fear, not anger. Certainty. Later that afternoon, while I was watering the small potted rosemary plant Lily had given me, I heard hurried steps. Kayla stormed in without knocking, her cheeks flushed, her breath sharp. "Why did the bank call me?" she demanded. "I imagine they didn't," I replied calmly. "They called me." Her eyes narrowed. "They said the request couldn't be processed. They asked if you had refused something. Did you?" "Yes." The words seemed to lodge in her throat. "I told them," I continued, "that no one but me has authorization on my accounts, and that any future attempts should be reported." Her lips parted, then closed, then parted again, like someone trying to respond without revealing too much emotion. "Margaret, this is ridiculous. We're trying to help you." "You're trying to manage me," I corrected. "Because you need managing." She said it louder than she meant to, and for a brief, exquisite second, she realized it. She pressed her lips together, regaining control. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "It's exactly what you meant." Kayla took a step closer, lowering her voice. "When older people make financial mistakes, it affects the whole family. We have responsibilities, Margaret. Mortgages, tuition, insurance. All of which," I said gently, "are your responsibilities, not mine." She stared at me then, truly stared, as though seeing me for the first time, not as the quiet, pliable presence she preferred, but as a woman who had lived long enough to outgrow intimidation. "You're making things very difficult," she whispered. "I know," I said. "It's long overdue." She left in a rush, her footsteps sharp against the stairs. I stood there alone, the rosemary still damp in my hand, and felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not spite, a different kind of certainty. Kayla believed she could unmake me with labels, but no one has that power, not unless you hand it to them. And I was done handing things over. The next day began quietly, too quietly, the kind of quiet that tells you someone is planning something. I felt it before I saw anything, the way old sailors sense a shift in weather long before the clouds appear. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the driveway. Kayla's car was still there at 8:30, which was unusual. She normally left before Daniel. Today she paced the kitchen instead, her shadow moving behind the blinds, sharp and fast. When Daniel stepped outside, she followed him to the car, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. He looked up toward my apartment once, uncertainty written plainly on his face. Then he kissed her cheek, got in the car, and drove off. Kayla didn't leave. That alone told me the day would not pass quietly. At 10:15, the phone on my small table rang. The bank. Again. "Mrs. Holloway," the representative said, "we've received a second attempt to add additional authorized users to your accounts. We're calling to verify that this request is still unauthorized." My breath didn't hitch. My heart didn't race. I simply straightened in my chair. "Yes," I said. "Unauthorized and unacceptable. We've flagged your profile accordingly. No changes will be allowed without your physical presence and verbal password." "Thank you," I replied. As I hung up, I felt no panic, just clarity sharpening, steady as a blade being honed. A few minutes later, as if summoned by the truth, Kayla appeared at my door. She didn't knock. She opened it halfway, then paused when she saw I was already looking at her. "Margaret," she said, forcing a smile so brittle it might have cracked if I'd touched it. "I think we should talk." I gestured for her to come in, then talk. She shut the door behind her and clasped her hands together with exaggerated calm. "The bank called me again." "Did they?" I asked mildly. "Yes. They said there was a misunderstanding, that they cannot add us to your accounts unless you approve it. And you told them," she drew a breath, "that you refuse." I did. Her composure wavered. For the first time, she looked less like a woman in control and more like one watching control slip through her fingers. "Margaret," she said carefully, "our household finances are complicated. Daniel and I are juggling so many obligations. If something happened to you—" "Nothing has happened," I interrupted quietly. "Accept your frustration." She stared at me. It unsettled her that my tone never rose, that I didn't match her intensity. People like Kayla expect resistance to be loud. It confuses them when it's calm. After a moment, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Do you even understand the pressure Daniel is under? We are trying to build a life here, a future. And your stubbornness, your refusal to cooperate, makes everything harder." "Daniel's work pressures," I said, "are not solved by gaining access to my accounts." Her lips tightened. A crack, a small one, but deep. "I am thinking of the whole family," she insisted. "I am thinking of Lily," I replied, "and myself." Her eyes flicked to the table, the leather folder lying open just enough to reveal a corner of the trust documents. Something changed in her expression then. She didn't recognize the papers, but she recognized importance. "What is that?" she asked, attempting casual interest, but failing. "Private," I said. The word landed between us like a stone. "Margaret," she said slowly, "are you hiding something from us?" "I am protecting something from you." Her breath caught. not fear, anger, sharp, rising anger. "You are being ungrateful," she snapped. "We let you live here. We take care of things for you." Daniel bends over backward trying to make sure you're comfortable, and you repay us with suspicion. "You call me a burden in my own home," I answered softly, "and you expect gratitude." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Kayla swallowed hard, searching for words she could no longer shape into excuses. She wasn't prepared for the mirror I held up. She wasn't used to seeing herself. "You're twisting things," she said weakly. "No," I said. "I'm correcting them." She took a step back, as if suddenly uncertain of the room, the air, the ground beneath her. "Daniel will hear about this," she threatened. "I expect he will," I replied. She left without another word, pulling the door shut behind her, hard enough to rattle the frame. When the silence settled again, it brought something with it, an understanding I had sensed for days but had not named. Kayla didn't just want access. She wanted control of a future she assumed was hers to claim. But she had overlooked one essential truth. I was not done shaping my own future, and I had 77 years of strength behind me. The bank didn't wait long. By early afternoon, another call came, though this time the representative's voice carried a subtle edge of concern. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "we've now recorded 3 unauthorized attempts to alter your account permissions. We wanted to confirm again that you did not initiate these." "I did not," I answered. "Would you like us to activate a full protective freeze on any changes? This will restrict all edits except those made by you in person." I looked out the window. Below, Kayla stood in the driveway with her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing sharply as she paced. Her frustration had begun to show not just in her face, but in the stiffness of her shoulders, in the clipped movements of a woman accustomed to winning and suddenly finding her strategies useless. "Yes," I said quietly. "Activate the freeze." The representative confirmed the changes, and when I hung up, I let the phone rest against my palm for a moment. The room felt unusually still, as if holding its breath. A freeze. A small thing in the bank system. A monumental thing in the architecture of my life. Around 4, Daniel arrived home. I heard the familiar slam of the car door, the muffled voices, the front door opening. And then, something new. Raised voices. His and Kayla's. Not shouting, but tense, sharp, breaking like thin ice under weight. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the rhythm of blame. And beneath it, something like fear. It wasn't long before Daniel climbed the stairs. His knock was softer than usual, hesitant. "Mom," he said when I opened the door. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He stepped inside and closed the door gently, as if afraid the house itself might listen. He didn't sit. He hovered in the center of the room like a man unsure where he belonged. "Mom, did you tell the bank not to let us access your accounts?" I met his eyes, calm and steady. "I did." He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Kayla is upset." "I imagine so. She said she only wanted to help. She said you misunderstood." I let the silence settle before answering. "Did you misunderstand, Daniel?" He looked at me, and for once, his gaze didn't slip away. His confusion was raw, unpolished. He was a boy again in that moment, standing in front of me with scraped knees, unsure whether he should confess or hide. "Mom," he said quietly, "Kayla thinks you're not as sharp as you used to be. She thinks eventually you'll need someone to manage things. She thinks..." That I am a burden, I finished. The words struck him like a slap, though I had spoken them gently. She didn't. She did, and you know it. He shut his eyes briefly, and the weight of reality pressed into his shoulders. When he opened them, he looked older than he had that morning, more worn. Mom, our finances. They're tight. And Kayla thought maybe if we consolidated things. My accounts are not your consolidation plan, I said softly. He swallowed. I know. I want everyone to get along. I felt a slow ache in my chest. Not disappointment, not anger. Just the sorrow of seeing your child attempt to straddle a line that cannot be straddled. Daniel, I said gently, your wife's discomfort is not mine to fix. He stood there, absorbing the words the way people absorb truths they've long avoided. His shoulders sagged slightly. Mom, I'm sorry, he murmured. I nodded. I know you are. He hesitated. Is there anything you need from me? There it was again. His attempt to mend, to paper over the crack instead of addressing the fracture beneath it. Yes, I said. I need you to let me handle my own life. His breath hitched, not from hurt, but from realization. All right, he said quietly. I can do that. We stood together in the soft light of the late afternoon, neither of us moving, neither of us filling the silence with false comforts. He finally left, heading downstairs slowly, as though gravity had changed. A few minutes later, I heard Kayla's voice, sharp and incredulous. She refused? Again, Daniel answered, but I couldn't hear his words. Only the shift in Kayla's tone, a rising panic disguised as outrage. Something had changed. She could feel it. She just didn't understand it yet. I returned to my table, opened the leather folder, and reviewed the trust documents once more. My fingers moved steadily, my mind clear. Kayla believed she had cornered me. She didn't realize she'd merely pushed me into remembering who I have always been, a woman who bends when she chooses and stands when she must. By the next morning, the tension in the house didn't just linger, it thickened. It settled into the walls, into the air between steps, into the way Kayla shut the cupboards a little too hard, and the way Daniel chose silence instead of smoothing her edges. Some families shout, others sharpen their quiet. We were the second kind. I kept to my apartment, watering the rosemary, dusting the small bookshelf, doing ordinary things with deliberate calm. But ordinary things feel different when you know the ground beneath everyone else is starting to crack. Around 9, I heard it. Kayla on the phone again. Her voice carried through the garage, sharp and frantic. I don't understand why it's frozen. They won't give me information. They won't even confirm balances. Her footsteps paced. No, they said only Margaret can authorize changes. Yes, I tried that already. I told you. It didn't work. She paused, then lowered her voice, though not enough. No, Daniel doesn't know everything yet. He's too soft on her. If he'd handled it earlier. She stopped, realizing too late that her words had traveled upward. I returned to my chair, sitting down with the slow grace of someone who has no reason to rush. My calm wasn't feigned. Calm born from truth is unbreakable. A few minutes later, she came storming up the stairs. No knock. She pushed the door open so sharply it hit the wall. Did you freeze our accounts? She demanded. I looked up from my teacup. Your accounts? No. Don't play games with me, she snapped. The bank said. I froze my accounts, I corrected gently. If your financial plans depended on accessing them, that is not my doing. She stared, momentarily stunned by the precision of the truth. "You had no right," she finally said, her voice trembling with fury. "I have every right," I replied. "They are my accounts." "You're destabilizing things. Daniel and I have bills, obligations." "Obligations," I said softly, "that have nothing to do with me." Her expression twisted, desperation inching in. The kind of desperation that comes when a door expected to open has been locked for good. "You don't understand," she said. "We're behind on several payments. Things have been difficult." "And you intended," I said quietly, "to use my accounts to correct your difficulties." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Silence betrays the truth more honestly than speech. She took a step forward, her voice tightening. "Margaret, you should want to help your family." "My family," I said, "includes Lily, and myself, and Daniel, though not in the way you imagine." "You're punishing us," she spit out. "No, I am protecting myself." She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, hunting for an argument sharp enough to pierce me. But she found none. Not because she lacked weaponry, but because mine was stronger. I knew the truth. She knew I knew it, and she hated that knowledge more than she hated me. "When Daniel finds out what you've done," she threatened, "he'll take Lily and we'll move. You'll be alone again. Is that what you want?" I didn't flinch. Threats only work on those who believe they have something to lose. "I don't fear solitude," I said. "I fear allowing myself to be diminished." For the first time, she stepped back, not out of respect, but out of realization. She understood something finally. The woman she had been trying to manipulate was not breaking. Kayla's breathing faltered. "You've made things impossible." "No," I said. "You just assumed they were yours to control." She left without another word, slamming the door so hard it shuddered. Her steps pounded down the stairs, then across the driveway. I could hear her calling Daniel, her voice frantic, unraveling. I sat there in the settling quiet, letting the stillness fill all the corners she had disturbed. And then, unexpectedly, my phone buzzed. A text from Lily. "Grandma, can I come see you after school? I miss you." A small, simple message. But it landed deep in my chest, more powerful than any bank freeze or confrontation. Because while Kayla clawed for control, Lily reached for connection. And in the end, that was the difference. One wanted access to what I had. The other wanted access to me. Daniel came home earlier than usual that evening. I knew it the moment his car turned into the driveway. His driving always changed when he was upset. Slower, heavier, as though the weight of his thoughts pressed down on the steering wheel. From my window, I watched him sit in the car for nearly a full minute before stepping out. Kayla stood at the door waiting for him, arms folded tightly across her chest. They walked inside together, but not side by side. She walked ahead. He followed. That alone told me how the conversation would go. For nearly an hour, the muffled hum of their argument floated upward through the floor. No words, just tones. Kayla's sharp, Daniel's weary, both tangled in the same knot they'd been tightening for weeks. Eventually, the house fell quiet again. The kind of quiet that follows exhaustion, not resolution. It didn't take long before I heard footsteps on the stairs. "Mom?" Daniel called softly. "It's me." I opened the door before he reached it. He looked worn, not physically, but in the way a man looks when the truth he's been avoiding finally demands attention. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside and closed the door gently, as if afraid a loud noise would shatter what little stability remained. He didn't sit. He paced once, then stopped. Mom, he began, Kayla told me what happened with the bank. I assumed she would. He hesitated, then exhaled. She said you froze the accounts. She said you did it to punish her. I met his eyes. And what do you think? He sank into the chair across from me, elbows on his knees. I think. He rubbed his face. I don't know what to think. Everything feels like it's spinning. I let him sit in the silence a moment. It's the only place a person can sort themselves. Finally, he lifted his head. Mom, why didn't you tell me she was asking for access? Why didn't you come to me first? Because, Daniel, I said gently, you haven't been in a place to hear me. And I wasn't going to plead for understanding over something that belongs fully to me. He swallowed, guilt pressing into the corners of his eyes. She said you were being unreasonable, that you're making choices without considering us. Us, I repeated softly. Or her. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He straightened a little. Are you in some kind of trouble financially? She thinks maybe you're afraid to admit you need help. I am not in trouble, I said softly. And I am not afraid. He paused again, processing, trying to fit this version of me into the one Kayla had drawn for him, but the shapes didn't match. Mom, she's scared, he said finally. She's scared we won't be able to keep up with everything. She thought if you allowed it, just temporary access, we could stabilize things. And losing control of my accounts was the solution? No, he admitted quietly. But that's how she framed it. He leaned back, tired. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. You've been pulled in too many directions, I said. People don't see clearly when they're busy trying to keep peace. He gave a broken laugh. I can't seem to keep peace with anyone lately. That's because peace doesn't come from pretending nothing is wrong, I said. It comes from choosing what is right. He sat with that. Really sat with it. Then slowly he spoke the words I'd been waiting for. Not because they changed anything, but because they acknowledged the truth. Mom, did Kayla call you a burden? There was no accusation in his voice, only a quiet ache. Yes, I said. He closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose. The truth always hurts more when it is simple. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear I didn't know. I know, I said gently. He looked up then, and for the first time in a long while, I saw my son, my real son, unfiltered by someone else's expectations. What do you want me to do? He asked. You don't need to do anything, I said. You need to see. And you need to stand where your conscience tells you to stand. He nodded slowly. And the accounts? Will remain as they are, I said. My life is not a backup plan for your household. He accepted that with a soft breath. Not resistance, not resentment. Acceptance. He stood, came around the table, and placed a hand on my shoulder. I'll talk to her again, he said. You can, I replied. But don't expect her to understand. Not yet. He hesitated. Should I be worried? For yourself? I asked. Maybe. For me? No. When he left, the door closed quietly behind him. And in that gentle click, I heard something shift. Not the end of conflict, but the beginning of clarity. Kayla was losing control. Daniel was waking up. And I was finally standing in the center of my life again. Kayla avoided me for the rest of the evening, moving through the house like a storm cloud looking for a place to break open. Daniel stayed downstairs with Lily, helping her with homework, trying for normalcy, though his voice carried a heaviness he couldn't hide. Every so often I heard the creak of the floorboards. Kayla pacing from one room to the next, her anger circulating like stale air. When the house finally went quiet, I sat at my kitchen table with the lamp on low. The documents spread before me again. I wasn't reviewing them anymore. I knew every line by heart. I kept them out simply to remind myself that my life had structure, boundaries, intention. Something Kayla could not twist, no matter how she tried. The next morning came heavy with gray skies. I moved slowly, letting my joints warm with each step. When I opened the blinds, I saw Daniel's car still in the driveway. That meant only one thing. Another conversation was waiting to be had. But it wasn't Daniel who arrived at my door. Kayla climbed the stairs as if each step irritated her. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She pushed the door open and stood there, arms crossed, eyes bright with controlled fury. "We're talking," she said. "I assumed," I replied softly. She shut the door behind her, too quietly. Quiet only meant she thought she had rehearsed something important. "Daniel told me what you said," she began, "about me calling you a burden." I stayed seated. "You did." "I was frustrated," she snapped. "People say things when they're overwhelmed." "People also reveal themselves when they're overwhelmed," I said gently. Her jaw tightened. "I didn't mean it the way you took it." "You meant it exactly the way you said it." She froze. Just a second. But it was enough. Her mask slipped, and beneath it was not guilt, but indignation. The kind of indignation that belongs to someone who believes they shouldn't be questioned. "You're twisting everything," she insisted. "You're making this into an attack." "I'm making it into truth." She stepped closer, her voice dropping low. "You are destroying the peace in this house." "No," I said. "I am refusing to be blamed for a peace that never existed." She blinked, thrown off, then regrouped. "Daniel thinks you're being unfair." I raised an eyebrow. "Does he? Or is that what you want him to think?" Kayla inhaled sharply. Not the breath of a wounded woman, but of a strategist cornered by her own miscalculations. She paced once, then stopped and faced me again. "You don't understand what Daniel is dealing with," she said. "The pressure, the bills, the—" "I understand more than you think," I said softly. "I also understand that pressure does not justify cruelty." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Her chin lifted, a challenge. "And what about your cruelty? Freezing accounts without warning? Pitting Daniel against me?" I shook my head. "I froze my accounts because you attempted to access them. I didn't involve Daniel. You did." Her face reddened. "If you cared about this family, you would help. You would support us." "I will not support dishonesty," I said. "And I will not hand over control of my life to someone who sees me as a burden." The final word made her flinch. She tried again, but her confidence had fractured. "You're blowing everything out of proportion. You're acting like I'm some kind of threat." "You're acting," I said quietly, "like you're entitled to something that never belonged to you." She stared at me then, really stared, and what flickered in her eyes was not anger this time, but something far more telling. Recognition. She finally saw the truth she had overlooked. I was not afraid of her. Not of her opinions, her insults, her demands, or her threats. Not anymore. "You think you can win this," she whispered. "This isn't a contest," I replied. "It's my life." Her breath trembled with frustration. "You're making a mistake. A big one." I've made mistakes before, I said, but protecting myself is not one of them. Kayla backed toward the door slowly, as if unsure whether leaving would make her look defeated. And in that hesitation, that single, suspended second, I realized something profound. Kayla had never feared losing access to my money. She feared losing control of the narrative. She feared Daniel seeing her clearly. She feared Lily seeing her clearly. She feared me refusing to be quiet. She feared the truth. She opened the door but paused, gripping the handle tightly. "You're going to regret this," she said, her voice low, almost shaking. I felt no sting, only clarity. "Kayla," I said softly, "I regret only that I let it go this far." She left then, quickly, sharply, as if escape were the only strategy she had left. The room settled behind her. The air calmed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the balance shift entirely into place. Not in my favor, but in my name. Lily arrived just after school, her backpack bouncing with each step. She knocked gently, 3 soft taps, the way she'd done since she was 5. I opened the door, and she slipped inside as though the very air downstairs had been too heavy for her small frame. "Mom's in a bad mood," she said quietly, setting her backpack on the floor. "Dad, too. I didn't want to be there." I nodded. "You're welcome here any time." She sat at the table, swinging her legs under the chair, her face thoughtful, in a way children shouldn't have to be. "Grandma, did something happen?" "They're fighting again. A lot." I poured her a glass of milk, placed cookies on a small plate. Adults fight when they feel things are slipping out of their hands, but not all slipping is bad. She frowned a little. "I don't understand." "You will," I said gently. "One day." Lily studied me for a long moment, eyes narrowed not in suspicion but in clarity. Children see what adults miss. "Did Mom do something to you?" I smiled softly. "Your mother and I have a difference in how we see the world." "Is it because she thinks you're old?" she asked, too blunt, too true. "She says that sometimes, that you're fragile." Fragile. Kayla always did prefer words that made her feel tall. I reached across the table and took Lily's small hand in mine. "Sweetheart, getting older doesn't make someone fragile. It makes them seasoned. Like wood that's been through winters. It bends, but it doesn't break easily." She squeezed my hand. "I don't think you're fragile." "Thank you," I whispered. We sat that way for a while, her fingers curled in mine like a small anchor keeping me steady. Not that I needed steadying, but love has a way of strengthening what does not need strength. After a moment, her voice dropped to a whisper. "Grandma, Mom said you're causing problems. But Dad said you're just protecting yourself. Which one is true?" "Both," I said. "And neither." She tilted her head, confused. "People say things," I continued, "based on how they feel about themselves, not always based on what's real. Your mother feels threatened. Your father feels torn. And I paused, choosing my words with care. "I feel ready." "For what?" she asked. "To stop being pushed around." Something lit in her eyes then. Not excitement, not fear, but recognition. Perhaps she saw a piece of herself in that sentence. Perhaps she saw a future version of herself learning the same lesson. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you going to move away?" The question pierced me in a place I didn't expect. "No," I said softly. "Not unless I choose to, but no one will force me anywhere." She relaxed visibly, the relief settling into her shoulders. There was a knock at the bottom of the stairs then. Daniel. "Lily, are you up there?" She looked at me, silently asking permission. "Go on," I said. But she didn't leave right away. She stood, wrapped her arms around my waist, and pressed her cheek against me. "I love you," she murmured. "And I love you," I said, stroking her hair. When she left the apartment, Daniel lingered at the door. His expression was different today, less worn, more watchful, as if he was finally beginning to see the shape of things instead of their shadows. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Quite well," I said. "Lily is a balm." He nodded. "She told me she feels safer up here with you." "I'm glad," I replied. He hesitated, then looked me in the eye. "Mom, I think Kayla is afraid." "I know. And I think," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "that she's losing her grip on things she was sure she controlled." "She is." He absorbed that, exhaling slowly. "I'm not sure what to do." "You aren't required to do anything yet," I said gently. "Just see the truth. The rest comes after." He nodded again, slower this time, like a man beginning to wake from a long, uneasy sleep. Before he left, he glanced at the leather folder on my table. "Mom, is there something you haven't told me? About your finances?" "There is," I said honestly. "But I will tell you when the time is right." A flicker of trust moved across his face. Thin, but real. "All right," he said softly. He descended the stairs, his footsteps steady, not heavy. Something in him had shifted, slightly, but enough. Enough that the balance in this house tilted again, almost imperceptibly. I closed the door and stood a moment in the quiet. The air felt clearer, lighter. Not because conflict had eased, but because truth had started to breathe. And truth, once given room, expands. The next morning arrived with a thin, pale sunlight that barely touched the yard. I moved slowly through the apartment, opening the blinds one by one, letting the light fall across the small table, the carefully stacked documents, the rosemary plant leaning toward the window. Everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, yet nothing felt the same. Kayla did not appear. Not in the driveway, not in the kitchen, not pacing the walkway with her usual morning irritation. The house felt divided, two halves of a cracked shell barely holding together. Daniel moved quietly. I heard him making Lily's breakfast himself, something he hadn't done in years. Their voices were softer without Kayla's sharpness slicing through them. Around 10, I phoned the attorney Arthur and I had used decades ago, an old colleague of his, now mostly retired, but still sharp as a tack. "Margaret," he said, after recognizing my voice, "you sound well." "I am well," I replied, "but I need to update some documents." There was no surprise in his tone. "The trust?" "Yes." "And your personal directives?" "Yes," I said again. "Come tomorrow," he told me. "It's time, I think." Time. The word rested gently in my ear, neither heavy nor urgent, simply true. After the call, I took out a fresh envelope and began sorting the papers I would bring. I wrote Lily's name on a small note and tucked it into the trust binder. It wasn't time to give it to her yet, but I wanted the reminder. Children don't need money. They need protection. And someday, she would understand the difference. A soft knock sounded at the door. Daniel. He stepped in, hands in his pockets, eyes tired but clearer than I had seen in a long while. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to check on you." "I'm fine," I said. "Sit down." He sat, glancing at the documents spread neatly across the table. "Are you preparing something?" "Yes." He hesitated. "Should I be worried?" "No," I answered. "But Kayla might be." His eyebrows lifted slightly. A small shift, but meaningful. Is this about the accounts or something more? Both, I said. It's about boundaries and about making sure the future follows the truth, not fear, not convenience. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. I think I understand more than I did before. And what do you understand? I asked. That you're not helpless, he said. And you're not confused. Kayla built a story in her head, and I let her. That's honest, I said softly. Honesty is the beginning. He rubbed his hands together. Is there anything you want me to do? Yes, I answered. Stop choosing silence just to keep peace. It only breeds more chaos. He nodded, eyes lowered, absorbing that truth like a stone settling into place. I'll try. That's all you can do, I said. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Mom, I'm sorry for not seeing sooner. You're seeing now, I replied. After he'd gone, I gathered the papers into a neat stack. The final pages slipped into place with a soft whisper, like closure, or maybe like a beginning. In the afternoon, I walked the length of the driveway, the cold air stinging my cheeks. I felt steady, certain, not triumphant. Certainty is quieter than triumph. It doesn't raise its voice. It simply stands. When I returned upstairs, I looked around the small apartment with its warm lamp and worn armchair and felt a subtle, unmistakable shift. I was no longer bracing myself against Kayla. I was building something beyond her reach. Kayla didn't come upstairs that evening. I heard her moving through the house with clipped, restless steps, each one edged with a frustration she could no longer hide. Daniel spoke softly to her. Too softly. His voice carrying that helpless tone men use when the truth has already pierced their comfort, but they're still pretending it hasn't reached the bone. I sat in my armchair with the lamp glowing warm beside me. The apartment felt settled, prepared, as though it knew the ground below was shifting and had decided to stay steady anyway. At 7:30, the quiet cracked open. The footsteps this time were heavy. Daniel's. He knocked once, then let himself in slowly, as though entering a place that didn't quite belong to the same world as his. Mom, he began, Kayla wants to talk. I folded the documents on my lap. To me? Or at me? He didn't smile. The question had struck too close to truth. She's upset, he said carefully. She wants to resolve things. Resolve, I repeated. Or redirect blame. He lowered his eyes. I don't know. I stood. All right. Let's go downstairs. When we stepped into the living room, Kayla stood by the fireplace, arms folded so tightly they could have been stitched that way. Her expression was measured, controlled in the way people look when they're desperate not to appear desperate. Margaret, she began, we need to clear the air. I nodded. Go ahead. She inhaled sharply. I think things have gotten out of hand. Miscommunications, tension. I want us to be a family. A family, I echoed softly, but only on your terms. She flinched, then smoothed her expression. I never meant to make you feel unwanted, but you've created financial instability by refusing to cooperate. Instability you caused, I said calmly, by attempting unauthorized access. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Kayla noticed and stiffened. You're twisting everything, she hissed. I was trying to help. You were trying to gain control, I answered. Her voice rose, barely, but enough to tremble. I needed access because Daniel and I are drowning financially. And you. I held up a quiet hand. You needed access, I said. because you assumed my resources existed to patch the holes in your life. But they do not. Her face reddened. We are your family. I shook my head gently. My family is whoever treats me with respect. Love is behavior, Kayla, not biology. Silence stretched across the room. Something inside her cracked then, not open, but sideways. A loss of balance, a loss of certainty. You're punishing us, she whispered hoarsely. You want to embarrass me. No, I said. I want to protect myself and my granddaughter. Her eyes widened. Fear this time, not anger. Real fear. What does Lily have to do with this? Everything, I said simply. Her future depends on what I safeguard now. Daniel stepped closer. Mom, what are you saying? That I will not allow greed or disrespect to touch what Arthur left for his granddaughter, I said quietly. And I will not let myself be pushed into someone else's desperation. Kayla's breath hitched. Are you cutting us out? No, I said. You cut yourselves out when you chose manipulation over honesty. She staggered back a step, as if the air had shifted under her feet. Daniel looked between us, realizing the truth had already rooted itself too deeply to be undone. Kayla swallowed hard. And what now? Now, I said. You live with the boundaries you helped create. I turned toward the stairs. Behind me, the silence didn't break. It hardened. Because in that moment, Kayla finally understood something she had never allowed herself to believe. I wasn't under her authority. I wasn't under her mercy. And I wasn't going to be small for her comfort. Not anymore. The next morning, the house felt hollow in a way that had nothing to do with silence. It felt like a place where something had finally been acknowledged. Something long denied, long pushed aside. Truth has weight, even when spoken softly. It settles. I dressed slowly, choosing a warm sweater and the old coat Arthur always said made me look capable. I smiled at the memory. Capability is a quiet thing. People underestimate it until they feel its edges. Daniel knocked gently at 9. When I opened the door, his eyes moved over my coat, the folder in my hand. Going somewhere? He asked. Yes, I said. To the attorney's office. He hesitated, then spoke carefully. Do you want me to come with you? No, I said. But thank you. He nodded. Lily asked if she could see you tonight. She can, I said. Always. His shoulders softened. He looked like a man finally beginning to separate his thoughts from someone else's expectations. When I stepped outside, Kayla stood by the window, her arms hugging herself tightly. She didn't open the door. She didn't call out. She simply watched me walk, watched the woman she had tried to contain move of her own will. At the attorney's office, the changes were simple. A few signatures, a few clarified protections, a reaffirmation that the trust belonged exclusively to Lily and me, and that no one else had authority or influence over it. We updated my directives, my beneficiaries, and my instructions for anything unforeseen. Everything remained mine, and Lily's. Nothing required Kayla. Nothing depended on Daniel. No one could touch what Arthur and I had built with our honest lives. When I left the office, the air felt crisp, almost kind. I walked slowly to the bus stop, enjoying the simple rhythm of my steps. Age had narrowed my pace, but not my direction. By the time I returned home, the house was quiet again. Daniel's car was gone. Lily's bike leaned against the garage. Kayla waited on the porch, her hands twisting together. Not angry now, not victorious, just shaken. Margaret, she said as I approached, I don't know what you did today. I didn't hide anything, I replied. I protected what was mine. She swallowed. Are you cutting us out of everything? No, I said. I am cutting you out of my fear. She blinked rapidly, as though the sentence struck a place she didn't want touched. You hate me, she whispered. I don't, I said softly. But I won't let you define me. Her chin trembled. I didn't think you'd fight back. I didn't fight, I said. I stood. And sometimes standing is all that's needed. I walked past her, up the stairs to my apartment. The lamp glowed warmly inside, exactly as I'd left it. The rosemary plant leaned toward the window, reaching for the thin winter sun. I set the folder on the table and sat down slowly, letting the chair hold me, letting the quiet settle again. Later that evening, Lily came up carrying a small sketch she'd drawn. She climbed into my lap the way she used to when she was smaller, resting her head against my chest. Her presence was a balm, pure, uncomplicated. Grandma, she whispered, are things going to be okay? Yes, I said. Things are going to be exactly as they should. She relaxed then, completely, trusting my voice more than the tension floating downstairs. She didn't know the changes I made, but she felt the shift. Children always do. When she fell asleep against me, I held her a little tighter, not from fear of losing anything, but from gratitude for what I had reclaimed. My dignity, my peace, my name. A woman does not need to shout to reclaim her life. Sometimes she only needs to stop apologizing for living it. And I, at 77, had finally stopped. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment. Your thoughts matter more than you know.